So in Will's book and in Jada's book, they do go over what ultimately split them apart and caused them to lead the separate lives since 2016. And it's fascinating to get the two different versions of that event. So that's what I'm going to do for you, a Will versus Jada review. But first I want to set up some context. I want to set up what Will is trying to tell us in his book. So Will's book opens really, really powerfully, and it's so impactful. I'm just going to share a few key points from that very first chapter. The chapter's called Fear. I always thought of myself as a coward. Most of my memories of my childhood involve me being afraid in some way. And then he goes on to say that he was scared of, other kids, and he was scared about being embarrassed, and he's scared about being hurt. But he finishes off with this sentence: but mostly I was afraid of my father. And when you read his book, you can see he had good cause to be terrified of his father. There was just no moment really in that household with his father where any child could have ever relaxed, could have ever just let their defenses down. And as we know, children have to choose, don't they? They have to become very pleasing to the parent that they're particularly afraid of, because look, it's survival. When I was 9 years old, I watched my father punch my mother in the side of the head so hard that she collapsed. I saw her spit blood. That moment in the bedroom, probably more than any other moment in my life, has defined who I am today. And I believe him. I believe him with every inch of my soul that did indeed define everything he is today. Right, now we're going to move on now, and we're getting up to the point where Jada is going to turn 40. Now, Will tells us in his book that he planned her 40th birthday party for 3 years. And it was quite astounding what he managed to put together. I mean, it was really wonderful, really. I mean, I can't imagine anybody that wouldn't be absolutely thrilled to be celebrated the way she was celebrated with this party, unless you were severely depressed, you wanted out of the marriage, you were angry, you were unfulfilled and frustrated. Then I could see that maybe this party wouldn't go over that well. But I'll get to Jada's version of the party and what happened after I let you know Will's version. So here's a little snippet about getting ready for Jada's party. One of the highlights was the fact that Jada's beloved grandmother, who I told you about in the initial book review of Worthy, which I will actually link at the end of this video so you can check it out. Be aware that it is very Jada positive. I made that review faithful to how she wrote her book. So please, don't abuse me. I've had enough. Had enough abuse. Whereas the second video was my revelation when I read the Monopoly story. Okay. Now, Jada's beloved grandmother, as I told you about my initial review, had died, and that she was the anchor for Jada. She was the good part of her childhood because her mother was so heavily drug addicted. Now, so that's to set up how close she was to the grandmother. Now, unbeknownst to Jada, the grandmother had left tapes of her talking to her grandchildren and other members of the family before she died. She died of cancer, and she knew she was dying. So she obviously made these recordings hoping that they would be played at a later date. And Will says, Jada's grandmother had recorded her thoughts during the final weeks of her life. No one in the family had heard the tapes. They would be the centerpiece of my birthday presentation to Jada. Now, this is where I think he made a fatal mistake. The rest of the birthday was amazing, but I think that this shows a lack of consideration at the very least, and it's not something I would do to someone I loved on their birthday in front of other people. If a much loved person left private recordings, I would ensure that they got to hear them prior to the occasion and therefore have the ability to grieve. And then I would ask their permission to share it as part of a tribute birthday video. That is how I would have handled it, because I think that is respectful to someone that you love. So then he goes on to talk about this amazing celebration. He says, it would be a surprise 3-day birthday weekend. I shut down an entire hotel in the city, invited dozens of our closest friends and family. We'd have gourmet dinners under the stars, followed by a surprise event Friday night, a private art show. Saturday morning would be a spiritual pilgrimage, a hike, and I got Jada's favourite painters to come and do custom paintings, and then Mary J. Blige was going to perform as well. So, I mean, that's just amazing, isn't it? So the first night kicked off okay because it was just an intimate dinner with about 20 of closest family and friends. And then he talks about the next night heading towards this area where he's going to screen this amazing movie. And on the way, there's a 20-yard long flowered archway that had been hidden from view for the entire dinner. The reveal drew oohs and ahs from the crowd, and the inside of the archway was lined with photos of Jada. Oh, bit much. I mean, I'm sorry for anyone that's from the USA. I know that it's very much a Hollywood thing, this very gushy over each other thing. But I mean, I could imagine in Australia that if anyone tried to do a celebration like that where we all had to walk through an archway with pictures, most of us would stop and draw on the pictures or would laugh and mock, and there would be a lot of jokes and there would be very irreverent reaction. We just can't do the gushy. It's just too much. Anyway, we'll continue. A gallery in celebration of her power, her beauty, and her contribution to all our lives. Will, this is so try-hard. This is so incredibly try-hard. Do you realise that if you meet the right girl, the right one, do you realise that she would be happy to have a bunch of daffodils and a walk along the beach and a kiss as the sun goes down? That's all it would take. Honestly, honey, you don't have to do archways and celebrations of people. You know, that's a tell. That's a red flag right there. So then the room goes silent as Jada's beloved grandmother begins to speak. Now, the recordings were directed, he says, to specific family members. Now, I presume that some of it was directed to Jada, but there were other family members that were actually hearing the grandmother, and they were crying, and it was, you know, very moving. And everyone was oohing and ahhing, and friends and family erupted in a standing ovation at the end of the movie. All except Jada. This is a direct quote. She sat motionless, refusing to make eye contact with me. So basically they had a huge fight. They didn't speak for days. They went back to their house. It just got worse and worse and worse. And it came to this head where Will Smith goes up to Jada and says, I can't do this anymore. Don't blame him. I am not responsible for your happiness. I cannot do this anymore. I'm out. And then she seemed relieved and happy about that, and she was out too. But the thing I'm getting from Jada is that she's happy not to have him. I don't get the impression she overly even likes him most of the time, but I don't think she's willing for him to move on. I don't think she's willing for him to find love with someone else. She's fine with an affair, and I'm sure he's had heaps, but she doesn't want him to find love. She doesn't want to hear in a magazine that Will Smith has thrown a spectacular birthday party for his latest love and invited all of Hollywood, and, you know, a great time was had by all. She doesn't want to hear that. She doesn't want him, but she doesn't want anyone else to have him either. And that's sort of a typical narcissistic reaction, I would imagine. Or it could be that, as difficult as it all is, she knows that she loves him and he loves her. And that is what they're telling us. So I guess who are we to dispute that? So I'm going to finish off this video with Jada Pinkett Smith's version of those events, of that birthday party and what led up to it. Now, to be fair, in her 39th year, she describes being horribly depressed. And it sort of alternated with depression and rage. Now, it's fairly common knowledge that rage or anger is your body's way of protecting you or drawing you up out of depression. It's obviously on the scale, on the emotional scale, often despair, no hope. Anger can bring you out of that. So that to me seems perfectly, conceivable. So she was feeling really rotten in her 39th year. And so she gets wind of this amazing party. As my 40th birthday approached in the midst of free falling, I hoped that Will could see I was in no position to handle any big do. I was very fragile and told everyone that I didn't want a party for my birthday. Now, that's what I'm saying. I mean, if you were going to go and just walk along the beach and have dinner together, well, it's not a big deal cancelling, is it? But a 3-day extravaganza had to be booked years and years ahead. Now, I don't know how you would handle that situation. It would be incredibly awkward to cancel that, not to mention incredibly expensive. I can understand Will Smith not wanting to cancel it because he probably thought, oh, once she gets there, she'll absolutely love it. Having lived with her up to that point, I think I would almost be inclined to rebrand the party and take Jada out of it and make it another celebration. I don't know, National Tracksuit Day. I don't know. Would have just made anything up at that point and just invited my friends for a fantastic time just because we're celebrating life or something like that, or celebrating Jada's grandmother, or I would have changed it at that point. There was one reality. I didn't have it in me to fake through such an event. Now, she'd got the heads up from a concerned friend who actually rang her up and told her about how much of an extravaganza this party was going to be. And this friend called to take her temperature, knowing that she might not be up for it. So then she later on describes that at the actual party, a few people mentioned that she seemed so isolated and alone and not doing well, and she seemed heavy, that was said to her. And so she mentions that. And she doesn't go into it a lot about the argument with Will, other than to say that she was incredibly angry, incredibly resentful, couldn't see any good in him, basically, around that period of time in her life. Like I said, my overwhelming desire for both of them is to have the courage to move on with their lives. Because being lucky enough to be in a good relationship, life can be a joy if you find the right one. And you don't need external trappings, great wealth, exciting things happening all the time. And the other thing is, if you meet the right one, you're not threatened by feeling unhappy. There seems to be this fear of unhappiness, this expectation that you must always be happy. And if you're not happy, then you're with the wrong one or you're in the wrong job or something. No one is happy all the time. We have to have highs and lows because it's the contrast that gives us the joy in our lives. It's that roller coaster. And the other thing I'd say to Jada and Will Smith is this piece of advice. You don't have to act or believe every thought you think. I'll leave you with that very deep philosophy, and I'll see you again very soon. It's impossible to read their books without becoming a navel gazer yourself. I'll see you soon. Bye.